Live.
Stream is live.
All right. Hello, everybody. We are a couple seconds early. Now we're right on time. So let's get started. And welcome to another episode of Current Conversations, where I'm trying to meet as many people from the world of packaging, sustainability, waste management, circular economy, and basically build a platform for people to ask questions, because I personally love podcasts. I'm always a bit annoyed that I can't just jump in and ask my questions when things get interesting. So this is what we're trying to do here. So please know this is an interactive format. Obviously, I have questions, but in the end, this is built for you to ask questions as well. So do send your questions in the chat. We will make sure to answer everything that there's. And with that, first of all, a big welcome to Dan Coppins, who is a packaging technologist expert. But before I introduce him in the wrong way, maybe you can very quickly introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Joe, and thanks for having me. I'm a packaging technologist and sustainability consultant. I've been recently working with KMI brands and starting up, going out now to speak to more companies about what they do with their sustainability. I've got a lot of experience in packaging technology, material science, how they interact with the formulations, and to be honest, the full service of where we actually get them out the ground through to recycling and how we actually return those back to the planet. And it's the full service of this that, is why we're speaking to you. It's trying to understand this a little bit more detail, the science behind it, and why we choose to do what we do.
Yeah, perfect. And with that, I would say let's dive right in, because in the end, it is called consumer packaged goods. We are packaging goods for the consumer, and most people that start a brand are not packaging technologists, but that they care about the product that is contained within the packaging. So they might be experts on cosmetics, they might be brilliant people in the food and beverage space, have a new idea for a new product that they want to bring to market. And none of them are experts on packaging itself. And I think this can be quite overwhelming in the beginning, because obviously you want to present your product in the best possible way. I think every person that starts something also wants to create as little harm as possible to the environment with whatever they do, because most people are not psychopaths and want to see the world burn. And it's just so difficult, right? Because packaging can be all sorts of things. Like we have paper, biodegradable, plastics, recycled plastic. There's so many buzzwords around that just taking the first step on that journey can be super overwhelming. So maybe we start right at the beginning and make up a scenario maybe. So I'm the founder of a cosmetic brand. We have our first meeting. How do we go about it?
Well, to start off with, you have to understand what packaging is. And we all know packaging, we interact with it every day, but we don't necessarily think about it. And it's become such a synonymous thing with our lives that it's automatic. The fundamentals of packaging are to protect that product, preserve that product, and promote that product, as well as inform the consumer about whatever contents is our regulation side, and obviously what risk it might have or not have. Now, the bit that we focus on in packaging is obviously protecting and preserving. So if you've got a product you want to get to market, it will depend on the type of product, whether that's a wet product, so a liquid, or a dry product, which is powders and solids. So most things are solids, but we know the difference. There are different abilities of different materials to contain these things. So you'd need to understand what it is you want to create. Now, the question I would normally ask is why? What is the purpose of what you're trying to create? Why do you want to make this product? And what do you want to achieve by doing so? A lot of brands will go out there with not necessarily with an idea of what they want to do or how. Most do, to be fair. There's some that aren't quite sure, and it's getting to the bottom of what they want to achieve by doing that. What is the experience you want to give to that consumer? Once you understand what that experience is, that's when you can start talking about what you want it to actually do and how you want that to be delivered. So the packaging has more than just the role of holding it, and bring it to you. It's also that experience of using it. And this is why we've got different markets, why we've got the lower end budget brands, and we've got luxury. Actually, to look at them in isolation, there's not a huge amount of difference. Largely, it's the actual formulation, but sometimes it can be bits to do with the packaging. But the actual brass bottom of it is very much, it is there to protect and get this to you and provide you with an experience. Depending on how much that pack costs, might change the complexity or what they're using. But there's always a reason that something is chosen from an engineering point of view. It serves a purpose.
I think you're touching on a very important point, because I think some of the most successful videos on, be it YouTube Shorts, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, are these unboxing videos. So this is such a big part of the experience, right? That plop that the iPhone case makes when you get it out, when you peel off the screen protector. It is part of it, and I would put that into the bucket of promotion. And maybe it makes sense for us to dive a bit deeper into what you said, right? It's like the protect, preserve, and promote. And since the audience usually from CleanHub is generally leaning towards the environmental factors and thinking it from the position of the stakeholder nature, it would be interesting to look at these, because I think one point that I learned over the years at CleanHub is the importance of looking at the entire life cycle of a product. And when we hold the product in the hands, in these couple of seconds where we take a decision, we often look at the material and say, it's like, yeah, this is made from plastic. I know that plastic is not sustainable, so I'm not going to buy it, right? Because it has this horrible reputation in the market. But if you look at the entire life cycle, this is one short piece of it, right? It's like we have the production and everything. And what do you mean by protection, and why is protecting the product so important?
So protecting the product really is exactly as it sounds. You want to make sure that gets to the consumer without contamination, in the state that it was intended. Interesting point you raised there about taking something off the shelf and actually looking at it. It takes 3 seconds for a consumer to pick up a product and make a decision if they're going to buy that or not. So this is the promote piece. And this is an interesting thing, because there's a lot of psychology and science behind what people do. And there are whole swathes of people out there that work in the field, the science of psychology and packaging interaction. And it's fascinating to see. Obviously, we haven't got time to go too deep into that today, but it's a really interesting topic. That 3 seconds, you've already got preconceived notions of what you're wanting to have. For your example there, you said plastic, obviously not perceived as a particularly good material. Personally, I disagree with that. I think plastic is a fantastic material if it is used in the right way, if it is treated in the right way, and if it is engineered correctly. Actually, for a lot of applications, it is the most responsible thing we can do in Europe. Obviously, different markets will have different impacts, and actually plastic might not be right for certain markets, or an infrastructure might not be in place. This is where we've got a lot of other materials that could take place. The reason that plastic in this country is particularly good, if you can make it a monomaterial, which is just a single one polymer, it can be recycled several times in multiple ways to ensure that it gets reused as opposed to disposed of. And this is the whole point of what a huge amount of people in the industry are working towards, is this circular economy. Plastic allows a lot of that. We can reuse it, clean it, reuse it, regrind it, remake it, reuse it again. There is a place for it. Not in every application, but some. The preconceived notion that you're taking that 3 seconds, it's about understanding how we influence that with the consumer and educate on the science behind it. There's been a lot of talk around it, and it's just understanding why that is. We're seeing a lot of paperization, but that isn't always the right answer. Often that is actually a much higher carbon footprint or impact to the environment, if you will, than using just a plastic. They often have linings and various other things. But it's influencing that consumer piece when you've got that 3 seconds, because that's what we're trying to do with the packaging, is make sure we inform that consumer at that moment. And this is something that brands aren't so good at doing, is educating on why that has been chosen for that application.
I think you mentioned something that is very important. It's like the monopolymer, so one material. And at the same time, you also mentioned paper, right? And this kind of brings us back to the entire life cycle point of view, because you also mentioned in Europe, plastic can be the right thing, where if you are in other places, it might not be. And this is, I think, where the life cycle assessment is so important again to see is like, where am I putting this product into the market? What can happen to it at the end of life? Is there recycling infrastructure in place? What happens to it in the end? And then the comparison to paper versus plastic, right? It's like, what is the upfront supply chain looking like? It's like, how much carbon do I actually produce to produce the packaging, and what's the effect after the life? So there's a lot of things to consider. And then coming to the monomaterial piece, and this is where I'm the layman basically, but I know that paper in packaging is usually not just paper, but what you said, lining, right? So we have a multi-material mix basically, where we're starting to mix paper with plastics or with polymers. And why is that a problem then in recycling?
A lot of the recycling companies don't have the infrastructure there or the machinery to be able to separate those two. So in a lot of instances, when you have a mixed material, it has to, at best scenario, go for incineration for waste recovery. So rather than we reuse that material, it will get incinerated. We will use that to produce electricity, which is a viable end of life. It's not the ideal, and there are better ways of doing it. And obviously, we want to try and claim this resource for as long as possible. So when we look at waste, a lot of people just throw their stuff in the bin. It's waste. It's not usable. In the industry, we are trying to change that story, that we don't call it waste any longer. This is a resource. It might not be a resource for what you're doing at the moment. It will be a resource for someone. If we start mixing these resources together, it becomes difficult to separate the two. You can't then reuse them. And that is a wasted amount of carbon, and it's inefficient. So it's about educating that piece and making sure that we design. And a lot of this, going back to the very original question, when we're talking about designing a product, that design piece is so, so important. It is really straightforward to create something new and plan it out, map it out. The difficulties really come when you have an existing product and you want to improve its sustainability credentials. It's a lot of impact. For a consumer on the shelf, they'll see a new pack and it's great. But behind the scenes, there is all the testing that has to go on to make sure that there's no interaction between the packaging and the formulation. But also you've got different machinery that could be required to make it, and a different supply stream that comes along as well. So there is a huge amount of work that happens way before it gets to the consumer. And also we need to liaise with the recyclers to make sure that they have the capability and the capacity to process on their end as well, so that we can close that loop and ensure we're using things as many times as possible.
No. So maybe first takeaway for me, always make sure it's one material. Make sure that wherever you sell it, this is material that you can actually recycle, that you can keep in loops. So location matters, the material choice matters, and it needs to fit whatever you're packaging. And since we are talking about recycling, we have a question actually in the chat. How does that work in terms of inks, coloring on packaging to do with recycling? Because I think, in fact, we're introducing more materials with ink. How is that influencing the recycling process? Is it at all?
It's variable. So the less ink you can get in, the better. But often these materials will wash. They will go through a bath, and the ink will be removed and then treated to become benign, and therefore it can be waste, kind of waste as a consequence. Because every process will create waste. You can't avoid waste, unfortunately. But the resource you want to try and get out as much as possible. Colouring and packaging, if you're colouring the component itself, so if you've got a plastic bottle or a glass jar and you've coloured that either with the colour in the glass, or you've put a master batch within this plastic, which is what causes the colour, you limit the amount of uses it can have post-use. So for example, a clear bottle can be recycled and reused in any situation, whereas a white bottle or any color bottle really has limited applications. You can't really use that easily to use to make another color, because you end up with flecks and not intended consequences within that. So kind of marks on the bottle, which the consumer doesn't want to see. As consumers in this country, we like to see perfection, and it's difficult to sell a story where we've got these imperfections. Having said that, we have seen Coca-Cola and some of the other big drinks manufacturers using recycled PET in their bottles, which is why they're slightly cloudy. It's all been tested, it's all good. Most consumers wouldn't notice, but it reduces the carbon footprint of that significantly. But they can only really use that clear bottle to make those. When it comes to glass, brown glass can only be recycled with brown glass, same with green, and same with flint glass. If you keep color out of it, it's better. If you can remove the inks or reduce the inks, even better. But they're not too much of a problem in the process, certainly not with paper, because you're pulping it up anyway, so it sort of bleeds into itself. So yes, inks aren't too much of an issue, to be honest, but it's understanding where your inks are coming from. So inks obviously have their own carbon impact as well. So you're looking at things like, are these inks made of mineral oils, which are very carbon intensive, or are they water-based, which are much less carbon intensive? However, you do have the water usage element as well, so something else to consider. And this is the thing, when you start picking on something and digging into it, it can become quite complex to understand that. I've worked with quite a few carton manufacturers to look at their source and where they're getting their inks from, and we can sort of stipulate a bit more about where we would desire this stuff to come from. We move away from things like UV inks, which have additives in or are normally chemical based, and we look for more inductive curing inks, which is basically just heat cured, because it is better for the environment all in.
A lot of things to consider, I guess, when I want to start my cosmetic brand and what packaging I'm going to use. Thanks a lot for the explanation. I think I read once that a standard Coca-Cola bottle or a standard soda bottle, it's not always take Coca-Cola, contains up to 180 different material types. Like if you take into consideration all the additives, all the adhesives in the label itself, bottle cap, the bottle itself. And this is then obviously a challenge in the recycling process itself, right? Because how do you get all these different material types apart again and get to a recycled piece of plastic that can perform as well as the virgin material? And this process in itself, like I think physically it's possible to separate all that. It's just a matter of cost. So it is getting quite expensive to do that. And a point that is, I think, then very well related to that is the UK plastic packaging tax, because in the end, these taxes, in my eyes, should be used as an incentive to use recycled feedstock in the first place, but then also to be used as a funding plug, basically, between what we have as a virgin material price and what the recycling piece costs in the end. And the question that we got here is, we now have the UK plastic packaging tax in the UK. Do you know if the EU or other individual countries are also likely to introduce similar? And I mean, in Germany, we have the dual system, right? The green dot system, which basically is a tax. But what's your view on that?
It's an interesting one. Each of the kind of the European countries, and to be honest, globally, there are various regulations on this. The plastic tax in the UK is literally to push forward the use of that recycled content. In the EU, they have similar rules, but they're through their EPR, which is the Extended Producer Responsibility Tax. These are modulated, so you get charged more or less depending on what material you use and the impact that has on the environment, and also how likely it is to be littered and how easy it is to recycle. The easier it is to recycle obviously means it will be cheaper to recycle. It has a lower tax attributed to that. I believe that this will be incorporated, the plastic tax or variants within this across Europe will be incorporated within their EPR, and it is looking at potentially in the UK that could also lead in the same way, that it will also be part of that EPR in the end. Until then, we have got this plastic tax which is separate, and I have seen positive effects of this happening. We are seeing an uptake in the PCR content, post-consumer recycled content, but the drawback on that is some plastic materials, it's very difficult to get hold of continuity of supply on this, which is an issue for brands because you can't keep changing the content amount. There's testing and there's legal requirements and safety requirements that have to be tested before we can say we'll change it from 10 to 20% or vice versa. You want to make sure that it's safe with every level because you don't necessarily know what that interaction will be like. Most reputable companies, I think, are using 30% now in most of their products, but it's just not possible in all plastic types.
All right, thanks a lot. And let's change gears a bit back into, so maybe this is a bit jumping around, but we started out with the three categories of protect, preserve, and promote. And for me, it is quite obvious that all three need to happen, because in the end, whenever you produce a product, you want it to reach its end destination, which is the consumer. You want them to consume it, so that the entire process of producing it in the first place was not for nothing, basically. Can we touch a bit on the preservation of products? And in the beginning, when I started my work in this field, I was like, oh, all these evil companies, and I don't want to give them an easy way out with this. But I also realized that there's humans working there. Nobody really, as I mentioned in the beginning, wants to harm the environment and is a psychopath. They would say, is like, let's produce horrible packaging, put it on the market so that nobody can recycle it, and I'm going to laugh and see the world burn. The preservation piece is obviously quite important to protect, or to make sure that the product can be consumed. And this is where we see a lot of multi-layer material, like with the aluminum piece. Do you see any way of how we can avoid so much of that multi-layer material and make a switch to more monomaterial use?
We're seeing a significant turn in trying to use monomaterials. Historically, we've used multi-laminate materials because we need cert barrier materials to protect that product from the outside, and sometimes from vice versa, protecting the outside from the actual unit itself, whatever your formulation is. Sometimes there are better ways of doing this. So each material will have different barrier properties. Some will have better, some will have worse. For example, aluminium, we all know it's a very good material. It is an absolute barrier. It doesn't let light, gas, or anything through, basically. It is absolute barrier. For this reason, it's very, very good to use on things like tubes. So historically, toothpaste tubes have got your 5 different layers. You've got a plastic layer, aluminium layer, and often an EVOH barrier, which is a barrier material, and another plastic layer. There'll be adhesives between these. These have been simplified a lot, and an EVOH barrier is so thin that it can actually be recycled with the rest. So the aluminium layer has been taken out a lot of these. But the reason that it was there in the first place is because it's an absolute barrier. You can't break through it, which means it's fantastic protecting, preserving your product and you from that product until you're ready to use it, obviously. The EVOH is not as effective, but does work for most things, but the shelf life will be compromised slightly as a consequence because it does let a little bit through. It's just understanding these transmission rates of these materials. Glass is another one, benign material, fantastic material, but it's not light proof. UV will get through it. Now you can add UV inhibitors, and actually this is why we have brown and green glasses, because actually it stops the UV, but it doesn't protect from everything. You can still see that product. It's also really heavy, so it's not always the best choice. It also means that you need 3,500 degrees centigrade in order to melt that glass to create it. Suddenly that's got a really bad carbon footprint. And this is where, the paper is very good because it has got a lot of good properties, but it's not very good with liquids. And it is very poor with gas transmission because it's just fiber squashed together. This is where plastic really takes its own. Certain plastics have different properties as well, which is why you see different types of plastic on shelves. Some plastics are much more dense, which means that they are better barriers for certain formulations. And this is why you end up seeing so many different packaging formats on the shelves, because they are all engineered to do a very different job. Now, a lot of your aluminiums will be coated in plastic to either protect the aluminium from the formulation which could react, or because you want to print on it. It's much easier to print on a plastic layer than it is an aluminium layer. There are different technologies with different things, but again, it gets quite complicated. It's understanding why you want to use that material. And this, again, going back to the beginning question, if you're developing a brand and you want your product, you have to understand it's that image. What do you want people to see on it? And actually tell me a bit about your formulation, because if there are certain things in that formulation that might be more acidic or more alkaline, that pH balance has a real impact on what you can and cannot pack it in. you also want to ensure that whatever product it is lasts as long as possible. One of the biggest carbon emissions globally is food waste. And we see food in all sorts of different packaging. These packaging types are engineered in a way to preserve that product as long as possible. Now, with mixed materials, like you were saying there, sometimes that is because there's no viable alternative yet made, or the viable alternative is too expensive, because these companies are here to make money at the end of the day. They are businesses. So as much as we want products to save the planet, these companies are still trying to keep themselves profit coming in. That is, first and foremost, we're a commercial enterprise. We're all consumers. If we really want to lower the amount of footprint we have, we consume less. That's the ultimate way of doing it. The company's job is to make a profit, which is to advertise and make us want to buy more. It's a constant battle. It needs to be a balance.
Yeah, I think this is where proper regulation would then obviously also be helpful, because in the end, these systems will always self-optimize for themselves. And talking about the emissions and about waste in general, in the very early days of my journey here at CleanHub, I spoke to a professor for packaging, actually. He said one of the biggest issues in packaging is not the packaging itself. He said, like, in theory, we could take all plastic and burn it, and that would still have a lower carbon footprint than what we see, because packages are so horrible to empty that you always have product left within the packaging that is not being consumed, and producing that material in there actually produces a massive footprint. I was quite amazed by that, because you don't think about that immediately. So I think the entire design is not only necessarily pure material, but also how easy is it to empty that bottle. And another thing that was mentioned here, and this then falls into the promote bracket a little bit, I would say, is like the overspecking of packaging. I assume that what is being meant by that, Ton, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that packaging is designed too big to make it appear to the consumer that there's more in there than it is. Perfect example, chips, where you open it and it's an empty bag, more or less.
I'll actually pull you up on that one, Joel, because crisps are an interesting one. They're not actually overpackaged. And I agree with a lot of the overpackaged thing. With crisps, the thing that people don't understand is when they are filled on the line, the bag is full. But what happens after transit and shaking, and this is the part that, again, you won't see as a consumer, where as they are shaken on that journey through to the store, they will settle. Those bags have got a nitrogen filling to help keep those potato chips last longer. So actually there is nitrogen gas in there, and the reason that they're half full is because they've settled, not because they're trying to rip you off, not because they're overpackaged. It is simply because the process that is there, when they're full, they're closed, but they're closed full. When you've got settling, and all powder products, if you take a powder product, so if we say a pre-workout shake, when you buy those bottles of powder, they will also appear half empty. It's all to do with that settling during vibration of the transit. So it's something that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but this is, again, it's engineered to be able to be, this will be full when you fill it, but we can't then vibrate and settle it on the line. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't work for the manufacturer.
That is insane. Like, definitely something new that I learned here. I will continue to ideally not eat crisps, then I don't need the pre-workout stuff. Or I buy Pringles. I'm not sure what you think about Pringles packaging, but it appears to be quite recyclable to me. Not sure if that is the case. So we got that question covered. And then we have one that I was wondering about myself, is we spoke about Coca-Cola earlier. It's not just them who are doing it, but what does it change to attach the cap to the bottle? I think from a pure pollution standpoint, I could explain, because I believe the bottle itself would sink in the ocean. The bottle cap always swims. At least that's what you see. You see a lot of bottle caps at the beach, but I don't think that this is the reason.
It's not. No, you're right. The reason that we've got bottle tops attached to bottles now is new EU regulation that states that has to be the case. This is to increase the recovery rates of these caps. You're right in half of it, but not the other half. So the idea is when people recycle bottles, often the cap is detached or it's lost or it's littered. By having it tethered to that bottle, the theory is that it will all go into the recycling stream together and be sorted out during that, because there are ways of separating those two materials. They're both plastic, but they have different densities. That is the idea behind that, which is why the EU put that regulation into place. With the large companies that do this, these beverage companies, they're adhering to the regulation, but the reason we don't actually have that regulation in the UK, but they like it here because economy of scale. If they were to make a separate product here, it would be less viable financially. It would actually drive the cost of goods up because they'd have to do two separate machines rather than one. So we've got it here, not through regulations across Europe, but we've got it as well because it's just that's how they're now making that product. And actually, I applaud that move. I think it's a sensible move to make because it does recover more material.
And we just have to live with that thing being in front of
It's irritating, don't get me wrong, and I think every single consumer that's used one hate them. However, they are there for the betterment of us all.
Yeah, Mother Nature will thank us for being annoyed by it. All right, great. I think we covered most questions from the chat. The others are comments, but not questions. We're almost at the half hour mark that was intended. Obviously, we could continue speaking forever, but maybe a bit of a last question. I started with a scenario. I'm starting a new brand. I'm putting something new on the shelf. Where do I start? If we start working together, the more realistic scenario, I think, is you are an established company. Maybe you started your brand, you packaged your goods, and now people love the product. You're selling more and more, and suddenly you also realize, okay, I think I should look at my packaging. And this can be quite the daunting task because you have to change production lines. You have to change so much. You might have to change suppliers. It can be a crazy journey, probably, or it can be daunting. Where do I start? What's because every journey starts with the first step.
I think the best thing to do here is get your expertise in. Find someone that was able to support you and review your packaging as it stands, because people in my position that know this stuff, obviously we've done this for years. We can assess where you stand. We can look at your machinery, we can look at your factory, we can look at factory flows, the quality. The whole picture is our job to understand and ensure that you make the right choice. With that, we can review what that packaging looks like. What are you trying to achieve with that? And then we can re-engineer and cost engineer to ensure that it is, in most cases, cheaper where possible and more efficient in everything that does. That's carbon efficiency as well as energy efficient and time efficient. Efficiency is what these companies want. And if we can make it efficient and that efficiency helps the planet as well, that's what we need to do. But you need to get someone in that can assess properly and make those recommendations.
All right, and then always leave a conversation on a good note. What are some trends? What are technologies? What are maybe innovations that you see on the market that give you hope that we're steering in the right direction?
It's not necessarily the innovations that I've seen recently that give me hope. It's the drive to innovate. It's the action itself. There is no such thing as a bad innovation. There's just a such thing as an innovation that might not be applicable at the moment. With further work, is more applicable at the end. The biggest thing that I think we need to work on from an industry point of view is collaboration. Collaboration across the value chain, from the mining of this stuff through to the recycling, the reusing. There isn't enough conversation in this area. It needs to be more intense and more collaborative in the way that we work. We're all living on the same planet. We're all seeing the same damage. It's not going to be easy to rectify, and obviously the work that you guys do is massively important, and it brings it back into our value chain and reduces the damage. It also gives a social impact on the guys that you're working with out in the Far East. There is so much that we need to do to get this better. The innovations that are coming up will only allow that to happen quicker. We are in a state at the moment that we have got technology moving at a pace that has never been seen in the history of mankind. And I honestly believe the innovations that are coming up through this are going to change the way that we live our lives and do it quicker and quicker and quicker. With the raising of AI, this will also be a supporting tool in understanding this and finding solutions to these issues that currently will require a room full of people to find. AI will be able to support that room to find that solution much quicker. The quicker we find the solution, the quicker we can engineer a solution in place, the quicker we can fix it. Speed is important. We must slow down the change that is happening. Climate change is happening. We can't really stop it, but we can try and quell that speed to give us a chance to evolve into what is coming. It's all to do with this collaboration to get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's what I love so much about speaking with you, working with you when we get the chance, is that I think you have the rare ability to take the position of the marketing department, at the same time take the position of the waste management company, take the position of the recycling company, take the position of the packaging designer, of the engineer, and at the same time, I always get the very strong impression that the loudest voice in your head is that of Mother Nature. So you always have the planet in mind, waste reduction in mind. And what I can say, if I would start a brand, I would definitely ask you for my packaging advice. And I think anyone else who needs advice, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. They can ask you further questions. We're going to post this live. If you're listening in after we have recorded this LinkedIn thread will still be monitored by our team. So if you have any questions on the conversation, you can still comment. Dan is active on LinkedIn. I'm sure he will answer your questions in written. Do reach out to him if you want to learn more. It's good for your company and the planet. And with that, let's close the conversation. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks a lot for your time, Dan.
Thank you, Joe.
And talk soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.